When I was a kid, I liked Archie Comics quite a lot. It wasn't like the deepest tier of obsession, but I cared enough about Archie that Riverdale now just offends me a little. There's very few individual comics that I remember. We're talking about an 80-year franchise here. The content is gonna start blending together eventually. But there was one strip that stood out to me, burrowed into my tween-aged brain. It lay dormant underground for years until a few weeks ago when it suddenly emerged from its well to shame mankind. I have not been able to stop thinking about it, so I've decided to make a little study out of it. Let me share my experience with a twisted bowl of fruit and why it stood out to me. The first thing I had to do was find the comic I was thinking of. Here's how I remembered the broad strokes of it. Two characters, Archie and someone, are playing tennis and they lose the ball, so they start using other objects they have lying around. I went looking for this, scouring every Archie comic ever made about tennis. This was a hell of a throwback for me. I was reminded of a lot. I was reminded of how questionable the art can be. I was reminded of the character's capacity to be flat and inconsistent in equal measure. I was reminded that Jughead's nose is the closest we mortals can get to perceiving infinity. It also turns out that there is a lot of tennis-themed Archie covers for some reason. There's 3 separate ones about Archie getting a tennis ball in his mouth. Also, Archie covers are something else. I've got tennis elbow. I've got football knee. I've got video game finger. Truly a finger on the pulse of modern youth culture. I find it fascinating that the nurse is physically shaking. This is her personal hell. A lot of the cover gags are also weirdly mean-spirited. Veronica, have you spotted any weaknesses in our opponents so far? Yes, Betty. They wear their hair all wrong and their outfits aren't color coordinated. This game gives me an inferiority complex. It's alright, Betty. If I played like you, I'd have one too. Betty, your outfit is fabulous. I had no idea so much could be done with cheap material. Jesus Christ, Veronica, what's your damage? Also, what does that have to do with tennis? So I spent roughly 2 hours hunting and came up empty-handed. Then a sort of novel idea struck me. What if it wasn't tennis? So I tried searching for badminton and found it pretty much instantly. The strip is Birdie Brainers. Isn't that the guy that ran for president? It was written by Mike Pulowski. Isn't that the guy from Monsters, Inc.? It was originally printed in Archie Digest number 235 in 2007. Allow me to summarize. It's basically like an avant-garde dystopian psychological thriller about Archie and Reggie playing badminton. Archie describes their method of playing as Smash Mouth? They lose the birdie. Oh, sorry. This is where all the badminton players will rise from the scorched earth and tell me you can't call it the birdie, you have to call it the shuttlecock. So they lose the Throckmorton and start using substitutes. First, Archie grabs an ice cube. He just dips his nasty, grubby badminton fingers right into the pitcher and plucks it out, and they play till it melts. They grab a cherry and play till a one-eyed demon squirrel takes it. Then they play with a pine cone until it knocks the cock ring out of the tree. They pick up the meningococcal and get back to it. Then the comic ends with Archie's parents commenting on how it must get boring to just hit the same little birdie back and forth all day.
Whoa, yeah.
So why did this completely unremarkable comic burrow into my undeveloped cerebrum? Well, there's a panel about halfway through when they lose the ice cube and Reggie goes to pick up the cherry, and he says a line that gained a place in my mind for more than a decade. We'll use a cherry with the stem on, from the bowl of fruit your mom brought out before we started playing. And even as a little 11-year-old with no critical eye, this stood out to me like a cherry in a box of weathercocks. Why would he say that, I thought? People don't talk like that. Even in the world of children's comics where people talk really weird and Archie can just develop a pink aura, people don't talk like that. I cannot begin to explain my tween-aged rage. This bulky, perfunctory chunk of exposition takes up like 3/4 of the panel and is literally competing with Reggie's forehead for space. And this sent me spiraling. It has me thinking about narrative exposition in general as a literary tool. You know, if you're writing a fantasy novel, you can write a 10-page bulleted list of all the rules for magic, or you can depict characters using magic that follows your rules throughout the book and let the reader figure out how it works. You can show, or you can tell. You can have a character lead with, "as you know," and give an info dump not characteristic with any kind of rational interaction, or you can have characters operate in accordance with their knowledge and allow the reader to intuit what information is pertinent. Birdie Brainers does not allow the reader to intuit anything. Birdie Brainers tells rather than showing. And sure, it's for kids, but I don't think you need to underestimate the critical faculties of kids that severely. We have this mangled mess of inhuman exposition, a sentence of such needless grandeur that they had to kill before and chop up its carcass just to squeeze it into the hideous white fin sticking out of Reginald's parietal lobe. Okay, now I'm over-expositing. The question I keep thinking about this is, how do you fix this? How do you repair this line? Well, let's try. Is with the stem on really necessary? Well, maybe it's got some implication about the aerodynamics of the cherry man, I don't know, we'll call that one a maybe. The end of the sentence, surely we can trim out before we started playing. There's no way Archie wouldn't know when the bowl was brought out, and it doesn't feel natural to the reader. You could say that removing it would raise the problem that the fruit bowl's existence is not justified. Good heavens, would this produce a plot hole? Is the solution therefore to include a panel of Mom Archie putting the bowl down? Maybe with a line where she explains exactly what she's doing in excruciating detail? I'm joking about the last part. But devoting a whole panel to that would be kind of intense. These digests aren't exactly large print. When we're dealing with 5 or 6 panels per page, this stuff needs to be premeditated, set up in the most efficient way possible. So maybe it'd be better to just show her doing it in the background and let that fill in the gap. Well, here's the thing. You can see that there is a bowl of fruit as early as the first panel, and it pops up multiple times afterward. In fact, it almost seems to be following us. So let's push the logic a step further. Do we really need to know how the bowl got there at all? Does it really have any bearing on anything? No explanation is given for the pitcher of white fluid. Would you incur the ire of the masses if you asked them to simply accept that there just is a bowl of fruit out there? We're talking about people playing an outdoor sport in what is presumably summertime. The idea that there'd be refreshments on hand really is not all that out there. So we've pared down about half of Reggie's verbal teratoma. If we're gonna keep going, fruit bowl feels a little cleaner than bowl of fruit, but that's just getting pedantic at that point, and I've said it both ways in this video. But honestly, I don't think he even needs to say any of that. If he just said, "we'll use a cherry," and you see him command grabbing the little droop out of the bowl, that's sort of all the information you need. You can choose whether to clarify that the stem is there or not. Once again, I don't know all that fancy astrophysics, I'm not a STEM major.
Yeah, this guy's hilarious.
And with that, this 21-word essay, this veritable last will and testament of exposition, is trimmed to a minimum of 4 words. The speech bubble itself is inoperable. I'm sorry, Reggie, you'll look like this forever. I can't help but wonder what led to this. I can only picture the writer writing a more rational, sensical line, and then some editor saying, "You can't just not explain where the cherry came from. Do you know how much hate mail we'll get?" And you know, maybe that editor was right. Maybe in the no exposition timeline, the Archie Comics headquarters got flooded with hate and death threats, and they got swarmed by a mob with torches and pitchforks, and the company just had to shut down forever. Probably not, though. So yeah, this will probably go down as the weirdest video I ever make. I'd like to think that I've given some closure to my childhood self by making this. It's very easy to say that something is bad, but to try and figure out how to fix something is another exercise entirely. It's not always easy to smoothly incorporate exposition into the flow of a narrative, and the presence of a fruit bowl is some pretty intense world building. It will always help though to stop and think, can I communicate this in a more natural manner? And by the way, you don't have to agree with me here. If you don't think the conclusion I came to was an adequate fix, feel free to disagree. How would you have opted to fix this line? Was there even anything wrong with it to begin with? What do you feel constitutes well or poorly written exposition? That was a lot of questions, but I actually have one more for you. What was the real question this video was asking you?